Hello and welcome to another episode of In Conversation With. I'm Michael Curzon, editor of Bournbrook, and you can see that we've advanced into the 21st century by having our first video recording in the aim of bringing more viewers in, though admittedly it may have the opposite effect. Today I'm interviewing Dr. Kevin Hickson, who is a senior lecturer of politics at the University of Liverpool, a former Labour member, though now a member of the SDP, a transition which we, of course, will come to discuss, as well as the aftermath economically of the coronavirus and where we find ourselves with the two major parties in British politics today. Enjoy. I thought we'd start by talking about your most recent work, which is a biography of Peter Shaw, because he marks an interesting case study regarding his views and his political character, of not only the way the Labour Party has changed, but of the way British politics has changed more generally since his time. I thought first, could you sort of briefly describe for us who Peter Shaw was, for those who don't know, and also a sort of a quick sketch of his views?
Yeah, no, I think you're right there with what you said about Peter. Very much a forgotten figure, certainly before the referendum. So a long time Labour MP, cabinet minister in the 60s and the 70s, stood twice for the leadership of the Labour Party in 80 and then again in 83. Yeah. 80 was really a serious chance. He was the Michael Foot said before he went off to do a lecture about Jonathan Swift over the weekend that when he came back on the following Monday he'd support him. And he would have been less of a divisive figure, I think, than Healy, and more of a unifier than Michael Foot. So really would have been the best candidate, but Foot was persuaded over that weekend to stand, and that was effectively the end of Peter's chances. So once that happened, Michael Foot became leader, and the rest is history. So then very much a forgotten figure, really, I think, primarily because of Europe. That's the thing that he's most well known for now. And already towards the end of his life, there was interviews with him on television where he admitted that his views, which had once been mainstream in the Labour Party, had become very much a minority. And the Labour Party became more and more pro-European, particularly after Jacques Delors spoke at the TUC conference in 88 and said that they'd be able, through Europe, they'd be able to restore all the things which Margaret Thatcher had taken away, as it were. And so he was very much a neglected figure until the referendum. And then his speech at the Oxford Union in 75 was beamed all over social media. But that's the only thing he's really remembered for now, and it's quite striking that he was probably the most senior figure in the Labour Party who hadn't had a biography written about. So that was the gap that we wanted to fill with that particular book, and it originated really from my involvement and the other two co-authors, their involvement in the Labour Leave campaign, which was very much a minority campaign within the Labour Party. But there were prominent figures within the parliamentary Labour Party then who've gone now. I mean, if anything, the Labour Party has become, certainly at a parliamentary level, even more pro-European than it was in the referendum 4 years ago.
Well, you're right. The first way I heard about Peter Shaw was the way you just mentioned, the video of him talking at the Oxford Union against this idea many years ago. And it's almost surprising for somebody who, such as myself, who was interested in politics at a time when Jeremy Corbyn was the first major leader of the party, to hear somebody who was a prominent figure in the Labour Party speak in that way, sort of very patriotic values being put across. Why is it, do you think, that change has occurred from the Labour Party of that day, when a figure such as Peter Shaw could express such views and that be seen as normal, to today where you're almost shocked to hear a Labour parliamentary figure say and pronounce such patriotic views?
Yeah, well, it's interesting that you mentioned Jeremy Corbyn, because of course he was on that Eurosceptic wing as well, and John McDonnell as well. I think if they hadn't have been leader and shadow chancellor, they would have been in the Labour Leave campaign as well, I think.
Yes.
And there are media clips with Shaw standing alongside Jeremy Corbyn opposing the process of European integration, which historically the Labour Party regarded as a capitalist enterprise, one that would limit their ability to introduce socialist reforms through the British state once its sovereignty was curtailed. And that was very much Peter's view. I think he came at it from a socialist viewpoint, but realised that you could only really introduce socialist reforms or social democratic reforms through a sovereign state, through the Westminster Parliament. So he's against things as well, like he was one of the few cabinet members in the 70s who opposed the Lib Lab Pact because he thought the Liberals might impede the Labour government's ability to introduce left-wing measures. He was against proportional representation because he thought that would, again, limit the abilities to get a majority Labour government to introduce the things that he wanted. So he believed very much in the sovereign central state delivering socialist reforms. And then, as you said, the Labour Party was historically there, for those reasons, a Eurosceptic party. And it changed very quickly, really, in '88, when, as I mentioned before, Jacques Delors came out to speak to the TUC, said that he wanted to develop this social chapter, the things which Margaret Thatcher had been eroding in Britain, and a sense of pessimism, I think, had spread through the Labour Party by that point under Neil Kinnock, because they'd lost three elections in a row in '79, '83 and '87. They believed, some of them started to believe, that they couldn't get back into power again. And so getting more involved in Europe, as it were, with the European Union as it became, was a way to introduce the social democratic reforms, which they thought couldn't be delivered through the British state. So it really changed very quickly in the late '80s, when, and also at the same time, Margaret Thatcher moved in a more overtly Eurosceptic direction with the Bruges speech in the same year. And so the Labour Party felt, or key figures in the party felt, that they could do business with Europe, that Europe was the way to advance their social democratic objectives. And Shaw was opposed to that immediately. And I think the striking thing about Shaw really is he was opposed to European integration all the way through. So we say in the biography that he read the Treaty of Rome. He's one of the few people in politics who have read from cover to cover the Treaty of Rome when it was first published. Liz Shaw, his widow, described it as a hazard because he kept it by the side of the bed. It was a tripping hazard in more ways than one, I think. So Shaw was opposed immediately and didn't write the speech that Gaitskell delivered in '62, but did write the briefing paper that led to Gaitskell's speech, where he said that membership of the EC would be the end of 1,000 years of history, when senior Tories were very much pro-European. Because again, I think that's something that's very different now to what it was at the time. But the Conservative Party was the pro-European party in British politics, of course.
And I wanted to build on that point as well about the Conservative Party changing its mind on the issue. So you pointed out that Peter Shaw was very much opposed to the European project in the sense that it was seen as a capitalist venture. And so as the Brexit referendum came about in 2016, and people saw the Conservative Party being more in favour of this, say, than Labour was, and possibly sort of changing sides because of that. Do you think that some might be disappointed by the Brexit that the Conservative Party will actually deliver through this with Boris? Because that's very much less of a sort of an anti-capitalist view and more, it seems, of a neoliberal aim of wanting to extend Britain's view in the world rather than to narrow it closer to home.
Yeah, very much a neoliberal view, rolling out the free market, seeing the EU as a barrier to yet more free trade. And again, that was very different to Peter Shaw's view.
Yes.
Because Peter Shaw favoured quite a strong degree of national economic protectionism. But again, the other book that I've done recently is the book on the Conservative right since 1945. And again, one of the things I think that's worth stressing there is that the Conservative right used to be against the free market and against free trade. There was a strongly protectionist, a strongly paternalistic element within the Conservative Party that realised that this endless pursuit of free market economics we've had since 1979 under governments of all persuasions, really, is destructive of the things which Conservatives, properly understood with a small c, should hold dear.
You draw the distinction in that book of conservatism with a big C, as you did just then, the sort of the Conservative Party, and small c conservatism, which I think can be seen beyond the Brexit issue as well, with sort of views on the family, say, and on crime as well. There's a lot of talk around the last general election in 2019 about the breaking of the red wall by the Conservative Party the Conservative Party drawing in traditionalist votes, perhaps because of its small c conservative rhetoric. But it seems less likely that Boris and the cabinet we have now is going to deliver on a sort of small c conservative vision, and more on the neoliberal trend we saw just then. What impact do you think that could have electorally in the future if these voters start to realise that that whilst there was a lot of sort of traditionalist rhetoric, this doesn't come as much into actual policy action?
Yeah, I think there is a lot of support for small c conservatism, as you would define it, out there, and it's not really represented by any single political party. The Labour Party has moved in a more liberal, progressive direction, but so too is the Conservative Party in lots of ways, particularly on the economy, but increasingly on social issues as well, as you said. And I think I think Boris realises that in order to retain at least some of those red wall seats that he won in December, he does need to move away from some of the free market agenda. And I think there are people around Boris as well, Cummings, perhaps others, who are sceptical of some of those free market traditions within the Conservative Party. But there's a lot of pressure. You just have to look at the backbenchers to realise that there is a lot of pressure to pursue that free market and free trade agenda. Further, there are very few Conservatives. I mean, they stand out now on the backbenches who are opposed to free market economics. I'm thinking of people like Sir John Hayes, for instance, who's been a critic of free market economics, because he realises that it is destructive of some of those things, as I said, that Conservatives should hold dear, like the nation, the community, the family.
I wanted one more question on Peter Shaw, which I thought was interesting, based on a conversation you've had with George Galloway in the past as well, actually. I said at the beginning, Peter Shaw marks an interesting case study, not only because of his views, but his character. And it seems that in his day, there were a lot more people with proper political mannerisms. They were much better at putting their points across, and also seemed more genuine in their pursuit of politics. What do you think of the political class we have today more generally?
Well, I think it's very easy to look back through rose-tinted spectacles. A lot of MPs who we can't remember at all now from both parties, the Tory squires or the trade union rank and file activists who became Labour MPs. But I don't think it's just nostalgia to say that there was a political class who are much more distinguished than they are today, really. And I think there is a real problem, and I talked about this in the George Galloway interview in relation to the Labour Party, but perhaps the Tories as well, in terms of how they recruit their parliamentarians. People with independent minds, people with intellects, people with their own ideas are very often weeded out in selection processes. So maybe characters like Peter Shaw wouldn't have got through in the selection processes that we have today. And I think that the general calibre of members of Parliament on all sides has gone down. Really, a lot of them are lobby fodder. There aren't as many, if you like, big beasts as there were 30, 40, 50 years ago.
Do you think there's a sense in which candidates are selected more to help push the party line rather than to help develop a party line to have sort of free thinking around certain ideas?
Absolutely, yeah. A lot of them are followers, not leaders. They just blindly follow whatever the party line happens to be. And we see this in whoever happens to be the leader. That a lot of politicians simply follow their leadership blindly, really.
Now, because of the state you describe with the two parties, with Labour and the Conservatives having moved in this direction, you mentioned before you were a part of Labour Leave, but of course since then you've left Labour itself and have joined the SDP. In what way do you think the SDP offers an alternative to the situation we've just described?
Yeah, I think the SDP does offer an alternative. It represents things that aren't represented by either of the two major parties. So I didn't feel, I became more and more disillusioned with the Labour Party, particularly over Brexit. I didn't support Jeremy Corbyn, but I recognised that he'd won, so I tried to make that stay and make that work. And I think one of the last things someone said to me in the party was, "Don't worry, the Blairites will be back in charge soon." Well, I haven't got much sympathy for the Corbynites or the Blairites, really.
No.
Party represents my kind of views, because although there are major differences between the left and the right of the party on some things, there's agreement. They both share this liberal progressive outlook. And again, that's shown by the MPs in the Labour Party becoming rarer. Frank Field, for instance, stood out because he represented a different kind of politics to either wing of the Labour Party, really. So I think the SDP does offer something distinctive. It's clearly centre-left on economic policy issues. We've been developing those issues. We want to expand the economy. We believe in an element of protectionism that neither of the main parties believe in. We want an active industrial policy, regional policy, that sort of thing. But wedded to that, a kind of social conservatism and a patriotism, which is certainly lacking in the Labour Party.
A lot of people who read Bournbrook and write for Bournbrook share that sort of view, a more economically left view, but socially conservative beliefs. And I've been having conversations with a few people recently who do still support the Conservative Party and believe that whilst it has gone very far in the opposite direction to these standpoints in recent years and decades, that because of the political system we have, the best option is not to sort of give up and go for smaller parties, but to stick with the Conservative Party, say, or perhaps try and do this with the Labour Party and try and influence it in certain ways. What do you see as being the biggest problem to this? Is it the sort of selection problems we talked about a moment ago, or is there something deeper as well?
Well, I think there's a deeply ingrained culture. I can speak with more authority about the Labour Party. I've never been a member of the Conservative Party. But certainly within the Labour Party, that certain views are considered below the pale. And so it's very difficult, I think, to see a way back against that dominant cultural attitude that exists within the Labour Party. So it's partly about selection processes, but it's also about the culture. As I said, on the right wing and the left wing of the Labour Party, at all levels of the Labour Party, certain viewpoints are considered beyond the pale, and yet they are attitudes which people who would traditionally vote for the Labour Party will subscribe to. So Brexit is certainly one, and that's the issue that led to me leaving company with the Labour Party, because I saw at all levels of the party people who simply wouldn't accept the result and sneered at those who would have the temerity to vote to leave the European Union. And as I said, those few Labour Leave MPs who there were in 2016, they've gone the party to become much more strongly Europhile than it was even in 2016. But other issues as well. So on immigration, for instance, the Labour Party has a very liberal cosmopolitan view towards issues like that, issues towards the family and so on. Immigration has been a long difficult issue for the Labour Party, going back to the 2010 election where Gordon Brown made that gaffe, about Gillian Duffy being a bigoted woman. I watched the whole of that interview. She actually expressed some quite moderate views, I thought, about immigration. But as soon as he was in the car, I thought the microphone was switched off. Then he expressed the opinion that he did. And it wasn't just a gaffe. It was a major gaffe, but it was more than that. It just showed the instinctive attitude of the Labour Party towards issues like immigration and towards those who have more small c conservative views towards immigration.
A sticking point which some people have, including myself actually, I don't support the Conservative or the Labour Party, but one of the sticking points which has made me hesitate about the SDP are the constitutional elements. So I think the SDP is in favour of abolishing the House of Lords, which I saw sort of drew up some controversy the other week on Twitter, and also in favour of PR, I believe, as a form of electing a parliament. What do you think the justifications for this are? Because I think a lot of sort of small c conservatives are naturally sceptical of these sorts of views because they are asking for too much change, perhaps.
Yeah, I think there is a small c conservative justification for reform. I'd make a distinction between, if you like, dispositional conservatism and more substantive conservatism. So a dispositional conservative is someone who believes in the status quo, whatever the status quo happens to be. They're resistant to change generally. They fear the consequences of radical change and so on. And that's a perfectly understandable, respectable view. But if the status quo happens to be something that's fundamentally unconservative, then does it really make sense for a conservative to try to defend the status quo? And one of the things that I go into in that book on the conservative right is that there were those who believed the conservative, on the conservative right, there were those who believed that the Conservative Party was far too willing to compromise with perceived political reality, far too willing to go along with whatever the status quo was, and it led to some fundamentally unconservative positions. So if we apply this at the moment to the SDP's constitutional agenda, as you say, then one of the issues, I think that one of the major problems in the country at the moment is that the English are disadvantaged by the Union, they're disadvantaged fiscally by the Barnett formula, they're disadvantaged constitutionally by the West Lothian question. So you need radical constitutional reform in order to address that problem. In order to give the English a voice, you need constitutional reform. You need a structure which represents England. In other words, you have an English Parliament, and that's one of the proposals that the SDP is committed to. So I think sometimes radical change is necessary in order to bring about small c conservative ends.
Just sticking on one of the institutions where I think the party sees the need for change as well, with the House of Lords. So we've talked about the increasingly low calibre of modern day politicians, but it seems, even if it's also decreasing there, that the House in which there is the most proper debate, sort of where party lines are less dirty, say, there's more proper debates rather than just shouting, seems to be the Lords. Do you think in this sense it could be a mistake to get rid of the Lords?
Well, certainly, there are some advantages to the House of Lords, as you say. The power of the whips is reduced because their members can't be threatened with deselection at the next election. There's the crossbenchers, so there's an independent view. There is more expertise and so on. But also, we have to realise that it's far too large. It's become large numbers of political appointees appointed by party leaders, and which has perhaps undermined some of its independence. So I think the House of Lords does need to be reformed. Yes.
Okay. Now, obviously, we're recording this as the Zoom conversation suggests, whilst the coronavirus is going on, and we've talked about the parties shift away, the Conservative and Labour parties shift away from a sort of a patriotic view, a social conservative view. To what extent do you think, as some commentators have been pointing out, the coronavirus could perhaps shift our view to be more localised, to look and focus more on the nation rather than globally? Because I think some people have pointed out that, if nothing else, the virus and our response to it has highlighted the extent to which we rely too much in some ways on other countries, and where we should sort of draw more attention to home.
Yeah, I think we do, and without going down the populist route or a xenophobic route, I think it does. I think there is an argument for having a more localised economy. I'll give you a couple of examples. Shortly, I think it was shortly after the lockdown occurred, and it was quite clear there was a shortage of medical equipment. There were still British firms that were exporting medical equipment, breathing apparatus, those sorts of things, to other countries where presumably they got were able to make more profit. So from a free trade point of view, that made perfect sense. But from a national interest point of view, it doesn't really make any sense at all, really, because the government should be purchasing those things in order to prioritise people in this country who are suffering from the coronavirus. And only this weekend, as we look ahead to the lockdown being relaxed and so on, there was another report on the news about the forthcoming economic problems. And there was a company in Derby, I think it was, that made medical gowns. Now, that's clearly at the moment an important source of production. And yet the government has just done a deal with, I think it was Cambodia, to import medical gowns. Why shouldn't they? They should surely be prioritising British firms to produce these things. So I think that those two examples illustrate the need for a more localised economy, a stronger element of protectionism, a buy British policy, which we've seen in foodstuffs. People want to know the source of the food that they're buying.
Yes.
It's very often labelled in supermarkets which farm the meats come from, this sort of thing. Because people want that. But why they should also want that, and I think they do want that. The government should help provide that in terms of non-food stuffs as well, really.
There's been a big debate recently, hasn't there, about sort of upcoming trade talks with America and the chlorinated chicken, which could come in as a result of sort of being too lax on the trading we do there. The same sentiment in that sense, I imagine, as well.
Yeah, although I think this whole thing about chlorinated chicken has been whipped up by the pro-Europeans. I mean, I've been to America on numerous occasions, and I'm sure while I've been there, I've eaten chlorinated chicken and I've survived. It's a fear that's been whipped up by pro-Europeans, I think. But again, individual consumers should be able to have a choice. So if chicken, let's say in this case, has been imported, it should be labelled that it's been imported, that it's been chlorinated. But and equally, that locally produced chicken should be labelled as well. This is a British product, and so on, and allow individual consumers to make that choice.
One thought which struck me in the last week, as shops have been reopened, we talk about the parties having to look more nationally rather than internationally regarding trade. And I had been of the opinion for a while that whilst the parties have moved away from this view, the public is still very much in favour of sort of localised production and local goods. But this was rocked a little bit recently when, as soon as, say, the fast food chains were reopened, McDonald's and such things like this, and your Primarks across the country as well, and all these other sorts of shops, that we've seen on all over social media and in the news, the queues outside these have been immense. I think one McDonald's had to have the police called to it because the queue was just out of control and had to shut down. But of course, local shops and local producers, which are also slowly reopening, don't seem to be getting anywhere near the same amount of attention as the more global brands. Do you think that there's as big a public desire for localised production as there might once have been, or that this has perhaps been chipped away a little by years of politicians wanting to be more international as well?
Well, as I said, if you look at consumers' habits in terms of wanting to know where their food comes from, so I think there is a demand for more localised production. And before coronavirus, farmers' markets were thriving, farm shops were thriving, that sort of thing, where people, as consumers, were able to trace where their foodstuffs were coming from. So I think there is still a demand there for localised production.
Yeah. A last question, which is perhaps a little less serious, but a fun one to end on, is you've written biographies on some of the big figures of the past. So we've been talking about Peter Shaw, but you've written on others as well. In 50 years' time, who do you think the biographers of that day will be looking back on to the politicians of today and saying, this is the big figure who has made a big impact in politics? Who do you think it will be who's considered to have made a valuable change?
Well, that's a very interesting question. I think although a lot of my academic colleagues might not appreciate this, I think if you look at politicians at the moment who've made a significant change, I guess you've got to say Farage, even though he's never been elected to the National Parliament, has, through his campaign over many years, did usher in major change in the form of Brexit.
Yeah.
So I think Farage has been a significant figure over the last few years, certainly. Who knows where the Labour Party is going to go under Keir Starmer? I mean, some of the opinion polls at the moment suggest that it's making a comeback. I suggest that that might be temporary because of the conditions we're in at the moment. I can't see the Labour Party winning the next election.
No.
Or maybe not even the one after that, or maybe even not even forming a majority in Parliament ever again, potentially.
Yes.
And in the Conservative Party, obviously the attention very much at the moment is on is on Boris.
Mm. Yes. Well, that's really good. I think we've had an interesting discussion, and it proves the importance of looking back on figures such as Peter Shaw and how significant their views and the character are in the politics even of today still.
Yeah, and to go back to your previous line of questioning about protectionism and local production and so on, I think that was a really interesting line of questioning, because I think that is where the fault line is at the moment, the key fault line. Yeah, there's obviously fault lines over cultural issues we've seen over the last few days, certainly. But in terms of economics, I think that's where the big fault line is, between those who want to carry on with free trade and those who want to move to a more national economic system. And that's a book which I'm writing at the moment. And I think that, as I said, I think that is a key fault line in politics at the moment. And which party is going to champion that most is open to debate, because the good reason why the Labour Party should be championing that, because it's instinctively anti-patriotic.
Yeah.
Now, it's not able to. And the Conservative Party, if it is conservative in any meaningful sense, for the reasons we've discussed, ought to be supporting that agenda. But as you said, it is very much a free trade, free market party. So a lot of demand, I think, in the country for that kind of agenda, but it's not really represented by the established political parties.
No. Well, I look forward to interviewing you when that book's released as well, I'm sure.
Well, that's very kind. Thank you.
No, thank you for your time.
Not at all. Thank you.
Thank you.